So as much as I want to drive this out of the White House, the reality is a lot of this has to come from the communities out.
Yeah.
We got to figure out how empowered, like the people that you introduced me to, some of the entrepreneurs you're working with here.
Yeah, they're amazing.
And what we need is a federal system, as by the way, I believe we had some good groundwork that's been wiped out in this administration, but a federal administration that can scan what's happening across local communities and replicate the things that seem to be working the best and help cross-pollinate them into other communities. Because the answers aren't going to come from Washington.
Yeah.
The resources may come through Washington,
Right.
but a lot of the answers are going to have to be built from the bottom up in a participatory way.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not just part of it's who's making the decisions and who's at the table. But even that, I've learned the hard way is not enough. I mean, I remember an encounter early, and it took me years to understand the meaning of this encounter, but we did this kind of mayor's night in event where we invited people to come kind of speed dating with the mayor, basically. Come tell us what's
On Hinge.
Just good old-fashioned,
That's great.
and I had one activist from the community who were sitting in my office at the conference table, and he's talking about how we just don't have a seat at the table. And I'm thinking, you're literally sitting at my table. And at first I thought, like, come on. But eventually I realized the joke was on me, right? Because what that means is if somebody physically at the table with me doesn't feel like he's actually got a seat at the table, what does that say about what happens at the table?
Right. That's right.
And that's where we've got to say, okay, yes, we need to make sure that, from the senior leadership of the administration to the people we are bringing on as volunteers or funding as entrepreneurs, that it reflects the diversity of our country. But it's also, what are the practices? What are the processes? Do we have a system that calls on the voice that has not been heard first because it has not been heard?
Yeah, that's right. And that's I have we want to get some questions that came in from the audience as well. Two things for you. One is, we live in a weird time, and I think you've started a campaign around really pushing issues of morality. And in so many ways, our supply and demand models have surpassed, our ability for our morality to catch up to it sometimes. And it has been tough to have conversations on moral issues. I feel like having tough conversations in this country is something that we're struggling with. You're watching families tear apart because of it. You're watching people not talk to each other because of it, or lie to one another because of it. But I think like conversations like you've done military service, and we need to honor that. We need to respect that. That is it takes courage. It takes sacrifice. Many of our police officers and patrol the streets, and this is a sacrifice. But there's also sometimes in the world we live in, we create a binary where you create a hero and a villain. And in our military, it's the hero is the military, and then Muslims are villains. And our police officers are the heroes, and the young black kid who is just walking down the street becomes the villain. And our brains are not having the right conversation that I can both love the military and be really sad when people are casualties of war. How do we have that conversation in America? Because until we have that, I feel like I'm always going to be I have to choose one side or the other.
Right. So what I don't think we have to do is moderate our values. I don't think reaching out to people who have a different view than we do means, so for example, in the case of the ideological spectrum, pretending to be more conservative than we are.
Right.
My experience in South Bend actually is that if you're strong in your values, but try to be candid and respectful about it, you can actually command more respect on the other side of the aisle than if you look like you're just trying to But what then has to happen is a process where there's a humility that's got to go into this, that the world is not divided into good people and bad people. And I actually think the left has as much trouble as the evangelical right, or more sometimes, accepting this. Your politics, for example, does not make you a good person or a bad person. I think there's good politics and bad politics. Obviously, I passionately believe that, or I wouldn't be doing this. but we cannot walk around believing ourselves to be superior. And at a moment when we've got to look, especially when we're confronting hate, for example, one of the things we're going to have to do that will not be easy, and I don't have all the answers on how to do this, but in the same way that when I was in the military, I learned about the practice of counter-radicalization, right? So there are a lot of people, especially, obviously we were dealing with it in the context of dealing with Islamist terrorist movements, and the fact that a lot of young people get caught up in this, and you want to have an answer besides that we're going to bomb you, right? That like gets them out of that and has them not be a threat. We're going to have to go through the same thing with violent white nationalism. That means actually recognizing that we have to access the humanity of somebody whose behavior is as kind of unhuman or counter-humane as we can imagine, if we want there to be any hope of conversion. So there's a tough conversation we've got to have as a country about, and by the way, a lot of the best models for this come from countries that have experienced mass violence, that have set up truth or reconciliation processes, that in some way we may have to get that far in some of to overcome some of the divisions that have been driven between us. The other thing we can do, of course, is just neuter that as a political strategy, because some of these divisions are being they're being brought forward for the purpose of dividing us, because when we're divided, some people are better off.
And you see Democrats do it, you see Republicans do it. I had a friend tell me that the difference between a wolf and a fox is, the wolf will look at you and tell you, I'm going to eat you, and they eat you, right? The fox looks at you and says, I'm not going to eat you, and then they turn around and they eat you, right? And I'm like, I'd rather have a wolf eat me. Just tell me straight up you hate me, and that we can deal with that straight up. Versus, politics has become this, I don't really know if you're telling me the truth or you care about me or not. I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I don't think we should suggest that it's symmetrical, right? Like, there is outright bad faith stuff going on, especially in the Republican Senate, but just more broadly. But it's not like but I do think the failure has been bipartisan. And I think part of how we got here, part of how people became susceptible to the messages that propelled this president into office, is that people watched Democratic and Republican administrations fail to deliver a fairer, more equal economy, government, democracy, all of that. And even though, he's obviously making it worse, but a sense of general disgust with the system was something he was able to harness. And the reason I think it's important for us to hold this in mind is that even though the president is deservedly very unpopular, he could win again. And the way that happens is if we look like we're offering a return to normal. Right? A return to normal is attractive in some sense, because what we have now is so chaotic and awful. But I don't think Democrats can take us back to the 2000s or the 90s any more than Republicans can deliver on a promise to take us back to the 50s. We've got to
identity plays a huge role in a lot of this work, and as you know, and we know a few things to be true. One, that being white in this country is a privilege. What we also know is that being a man in this country is a privilege. You are a white male running for president, and there are a lot of women also running for president. And there is this feeling that women who are running for president don't stand a chance for their voices to be heard in the same way a white man could be heard, and that even if you came out with the same exact policy, that you would be taken more seriously because of your identity. How do you work through a political cycle where you respect that we have privilege to exercise? How do you plan to exercise that privilege in this campaign to make sure that, although you believe your vision is the right one for this country, that we don't diminish the voices of some really smart women who are also in this campaign?
Yeah, so I think it's extremely... First of all, we have to acknowledge the way this privilege works, right? We have to acknowledge the way that racism factors in. We have to acknowledge the role of sexism in politics. And I think if we get it right, we also acknowledge that there is a chance for each of us to use our identities as a source of empathy and support for others. And that actually when we cross the lines of our identities, it does that much more good. So in the same way that, my marriage would probably not exist, well, just by simple rules of majority, if it weren't for straight people voting on courts and in legislatures for me to be able to get married, I wouldn't be able to get married, right? So the role of allyship there propelled my generation of gay people into a whole new world of possibility. And so, in the same way, I think it is much more important, because I am a male politician, for example, that I'm on the steps of the Supreme Court with Planned Parenthood when there's an action to defend the it is twice as important that I be speaking to structural and systemic racism and explaining what solutions I'm going to have for them. And that stitching together, not pretending there's an equivalency, but saying, because I've been on the wrong side of an equation about belonging in this country, I'm just as motivated to use all the ways that I've been on the sort of privileged side of some of those equations. Then I have to reach across and make myself useful.
How many questions do we have time for? Just wanted to check. Is that a 3, 2, 3? Okay.
Let's do 3.
All right. 3? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
All right.
I'll talk fast.
All right. Here we go. All right. So the first question is from Suzanne L. Suzanne asks, Suzanne L. That's great. Will you make the immigration courts independent?
I think that's almost certainly the right move. I want to, but the only reason I'm not going to promise it outright is I want to review how this entire structure is set up. So first of all, having it be part of Homeland, having a lot of these immigration processes be part of Homeland Security to the extent that they are is problematic. The way that a lot of these, look, no matter where the immigration court lives, if its setup is adversarial, you are likely to continue to see, if not the kind of horrifying spectacle now of the 4-year-old being asked to represent their own interests in a hearing. At the very least, you'll see people at a disadvantage when they have either a legitimate asylum claim or when they're in the immigration process. So independent, I think I'm with you, but what I really want to look at is how can we restructure not just where it sits in the government, but how much is a courtroom setting the way in which some of these administrative procedures play out versus something
So our next question comes from someone who writes awesome. I'll try to read this. On your recently released platform, you say you support legalizing marijuana. Along with legalizing weed, that's what the kids are saying. Because we're both on the
right on
the
elder millennials.
We're the elder millennials. What will you do to ensure justice for the communities that are most impacted by the war on drugs?
Well, one thing that's very interesting to look at is what's happening in Illinois. So not only did they move toward legalization, but as they did it, they also have set up a process, at least this is what's in the legislation that's moved through the State House there, that would, when people are seeking licenses, for example, for lawful cannabis businesses, give preference to people who are from communities that have been disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs. We can't, again, like I I was saying before, right? You can't replace a racist and wrong structure with a neutral structure and expect everything to be fine. So if a lot of people are incarcerated today because of nonviolent possession offenses, incarceration has now done more harm than the offense. And we need to not only have legalization going forward, but expungement looking backwards in order to allow them to take
because we only have time for a few, I tried to combine some of them together in one question. So the next question was, what will you do as president to be more welcoming to people who feel unwelcomed in this country now, immigrants, but also how will you differentiate that from refugees? On your website, you didn't have anything specific about the differentiation between someone who may be an immigrant or a refugee. What is the distinction in your mind, and how will we make this country more welcoming for both?
Well, it begins with just a basic sense of humanity. Some of this is policy, but a lot of this is culture, right? So the policy part, we know that we can clear asylum claims in a more humane way. We know that we could establish or reestablish family case management that helps treat families as families when they come to the border. We know that we can extend temporary protected status for some refugee classes, and some of these things can be done administratively. Other things need to be done legislatively, like comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship, protections for dreamers, and resources to accelerate the process of lawful immigration. But what is just the tone? You cannot have the leader of this country make some people who are in this country out to be the problem. It's not. And by the way, the language of faith, even though I think the president's got to speak for people of any religion and people of no religion equally, I do think it's worth noting that the language of faith in pretty much every faith tradition says something about welcoming the stranger. Stranger is a synonym for immigrant. That used to be part of the national story that we tell. It's not us versus, folks who are coming. It is how we build up our nation. The last thing I would mention is there can be engagement with communities that need more, even like in South Bend, for example. Of course, we have a job growth strategy, but what we most need is a population growth strategy, right? So we lost so many people after the auto factories died in the 60s. That we have and fund enough fire stations and police officers and roads, lane miles of road that have to be plowed and paved for 30,000 more people than we have. So when the president says we're full, I'm not. I would love 30,000 more taxpayers that want to help us support those services in our city. It's true. The only place we're full is on Atlanta highways. We are full on that. One more, please. And so I thought as a treat to close this out, someone did ask about Buddy and Truman, which I thought was great. Trish Whitlock, I'm glad you're here. I want you to do that, but before we do, I want to give him a real Atlanta, love and support. I'm an undecided voter still, and I'm thankful and grateful to have conversations like this because it helps me understand the stances of where people are at. What I wanted to do was, I was asking him, I was like, so do you love the song Welcome to Atlanta? I was like, we'll sing it together on stage. And he goes, I'm not as familiar with the lyrics, so we're going to help him out. So I'm going to say some words, and I want you to say it back. And I want you to listen closely. This is our little bit of our anthem. Y'all ready? Okay, ready? Okay. Welcome to Atlanta, where the... And we ride on the things like... Big beats hit streets, see gangsters roaming. There you go. That's the most Atlanta I can buy